Do you know why your hand trembles when you attempt to draw what your eye can clearly see? It is not because you lack talent. It is because someone taught you to doubt the very instrument that nature gave you for understanding her truths. I am one who was called the unlettered man, homo sans lettere, mocked by the scholars of my time for lacking their Latin and their books. Yet I dissected more than 30 bodies to understand the machine of life. I studied the flight of birds until I knew the geometry of the wind. Tell me, who learned more of truth? The man who read about the human heart in ancient texts, or the one who held it in his hands? If you feel your creativity has been stolen from you, I must tell you it was not an accident. It was a method. And I shall show you how to reclaim what was always yours. You are going to walk away from this teaching understanding 3 things that no school dared teach you. First, why your natural genius was systematically dismantled piece by piece in a process so gradual you never noticed it happening. You will see the exact mechanism of how wonder becomes compliance, how questions become memorization, how your hand that once drew freely learned to tremble with self-doubt. Second, how I, born illegitimate and denied the education of learned men, became the most sought-after mind in all of Italy by trusting one principle above all others, that nature herself is the only teacher whose authority cannot be questioned. I shall reveal to you the method of learning I discovered, not taught, but discovered, that allowed me to master painting, sculpture, engineering, anatomy, architecture, and natural philosophy without setting foot in a university. Third, how you shall reclaim what was taken from you, not through rebellion against the system, but through the quiet revolution of trusting your own observation again. I will give you specific practices, the same ones I used in my notebooks, to rebuild the bridge between your eye and your hand, your wonder and your work, your questions and your discoveries. The pain you carry, I have seen it in the faces of many who come to me. You sit before the blank page and feel nothing but fear. The canvas mocks you. The empty document cursor blinks like an accusing eye. You think, I used to be creative, as if it were a country you visited once and can no longer find on any map. You were told you needed credentials before you could trust yourself. You needed permission before you could explore. You needed grades before you could know if your work had value. And now, even when no teacher watches, you have internalized their judgment. You have become your own prison guard. The work that flows from your hands feels derivative, safe, lifeless. You can execute instructions beautifully, but you cannot create instructions of your own. You know how to follow the path, but you have forgotten how to cut through the forest and make a new one. Why should you listen to me? I am not a motivational speaker offering you enthusiasm without method. I am not a theorist offering you ideas without application. I am a man who spent 67 years studying the book that cannot lie, the book of nature herself, and I documented everything I learned. They called me a Renaissance man, but this is a misunderstanding. I was simply a man who refused to stop asking why and how after everyone else accepted, because I was simply one who believed that the experiment matters more than the authority, that observation defeats assumption, that the hand must be trained by doing, not by reading about doing. I designed war machines and cathedrals. I discovered how the heart operates as a pump, how blood flows, how muscles attach to bone. I invented the helicopter, the tank, the diving suit, not because I was blessed with superhuman intelligence, but because I was cursed with an inability to accept what others told me without verifying it with my own investigation. What makes this different from every other teaching about creativity? Every other teaching tells you to think different or break the rules or find your passion. These are the words of people who have never built anything with their hands. They have never faced the terror of the blank canvas where good intentions mean nothing and only skill and observation produce beauty. I will not give you inspiration. Inspiration fades by morning. I will give you method. I will show you how I trained my eye to see proportion, my hand to record truth, my mind to hold a problem until its solution revealed itself. I will show you the exercises I used, the questions I asked, the discipline I maintained. The system that schooled you was designed to produce workers who do not question. I will teach you to become an observer who cannot stop questioning. The system taught you to fear being wrong. I will teach you that error is the doorway to understanding, that the failed experiment teaches more than the successful imitation. You believe creativity is a gift that some people receive and others do not. This is a lie that serves the system perfectly. If creativity is a gift, then its absence is not the school's fault. It is your misfortune. But I must tell you, creativity is not a gift. It is a practice. It is the natural result of observation joined with experimentation. Every child is creative because every child observes without prejudice and experiments without fear. The school did not fail to give you creativity. It succeeded in taking it away. And anything that was taken can be reclaimed. Let me tell you of a day that shaped my understanding of what art truly is. When I was very young, perhaps 15 or 16 years, my father brought me a curious request. A peasant from his estate had cut down a fig tree and fashioned from it a wooden shield, a rotella. He brought this shield to my father and asked if Ser Piero could find someone in Florence to paint something upon it, some decoration to make it valuable. My father brought it to me. The shield was rough, warped from poor wood, bent and graceless. Any other painter would have painted some conventional heraldic design and been done with it. But I looked at this peasant's shield and I thought, what would a shield be for? To frighten one's enemies. Then what could I paint that would truly accomplish this purpose? I brought to my room every manner of creature that could inspire fear. Lizards, crickets, bats, grasshoppers, serpents, butterflies, locusts. I studied them living and dead. I watched how the light struck the scales of the serpent, how the wing of the bat stretched across its skeletal framework, how the locust's leg bent at angles that seemed impossible. Then I composed them into a single creature, something that had never existed, but was made entirely from things that did exist. A beast emerging from dark rocks, breathing poison, with fire in its eyes. Every scale I painted was a scale I had observed. Every shadow was placed according to principle. Every texture was the truth of nature, but arranged into a lie that was somehow more truthful than truth. When my father came to collect it, he opened the door to my room. I had arranged it so the light struck the shield perfectly, and he staggered backward in genuine terror. In that moment, I understood something that changed everything for me. Imagination is not the opposite of observation. Imagination is observation liberated from the tyranny of what already exists. The school teaches you that art is about following rules. Perspective rules, color rules, composition rules. All of this is true, but they stop there. And in stopping there, they kill the very thing that makes art alive. The rules are not the destination. They are the grammar you must master so you can write sentences no one has written before. You cannot break the rules effectively until you understand why they exist. But understanding why they exist should lead you to use them in service of something new, not to simply repeat what has already been done. Let me tell you of another moment, one that came much later, when the cost of this way of seeing became clear to me. In Milano, Duke Ludovico il Moro commissioned from me the greatest work I would ever attempt, a massive equestrian statue honoring his father, Francesco Sforza. It was to be the largest bronze horse ever created, a monument that would astonish all of Italy. I spent 16 years on this project. 16 years. I studied horses, their anatomy, their movement, their proportion. I dissected them to understand how their muscles attached, how their weight distributed across their legs, how their nostrils flared, and their eyes showed white when they were afraid. I filled notebooks with drawings. I calculated the mathematics of casting such an enormous bronze sculpture, something that had never been attempted at this scale. I designed pulleys and furnaces and molds. I created a full-scale clay model, 24 feet tall, so magnificent that people came from across Italy to see it. And then the French invaded. The Duke needed bronze, not for art, but for cannons. My horse, my 16 years of observation and calculation and creation, was melted down for weapons. The clay model stood for a while longer, until the French troops used it for target practice. Bowmen from Gascony destroyed in an afternoon what had taken me 16 years to bring into being. I could tell you I learned resilience from this. I could tell you I learned to let go of attachment. But I will not lie to you. I learned something darker and more true. I learned that the world does not reward observation. It does not reward genius. It rewards utility. It rewards what can be immediately used by those who have power. The school system you endured was designed by people who looked at my destroyed horse and said, "This is what happens to dreamers." They built their system to make sure you would never spend 16 years studying something that might not produce immediate practical results. They designed every classroom, every test, every grade to ask one question: will this be useful to the economy, to the state, to the system that employs you? And here is what they will never teach you. Some of my greatest discoveries came not from the commissions I completed, but from the projects I never finished. The act of sustained observation, of living with a question for years, of allowing understanding to deepen slowly, this is where genius lives. Not in the finished product, in the enduring process. You were taught to finish quickly, to move to the next unit, to optimize and maximize and never linger. You were taught that time spent in wondering is time wasted. And in teaching you this, they cut you off from the very source of creative power. The student who produces a mediocre answer quickly receives better marks than the student who produces no answer because they are still thinking deeply about the question. This is insane. This is backwards. But this is a system. And you internalized it so deeply that even now, when no one is grading you, you feel guilty when you spend time thinking without producing visible output. Yet there was one final lesson, one that came to me not in triumph or defeat, but in a moment of perfect clarity. In my treatise on painting, I wrote, "When you wish to know if your picture be like the object you mean to represent, have a flat looking glass and place it so as to reflect the object you have imitated, and compare carefully the original with the copy. This seems simple. Yes, a technical instruction for painters, but I will tell you what I truly meant. One afternoon in my studio in Roma, I was painting a portrait. I will not tell you whose. It does not matter. The subject sat before me. I looked at him. I looked at the canvas. I looked at them again. I painted what I saw, but something was wrong. The likeness was there. The proportions were correct. The colors were matched, but it was dead. It looked like them, but it was not alive. I took my mirror and placed it so I could see both the person and my painting reflected at once. And in that moment, I saw the difference. I had painted what I thought I was seeing. I had not painted what was actually there. My mind had inserted assumptions. When I saw their eye, my mind said, I, and my hand painted what I had painted 1,000 times before. I did not see this particular eye with its specific way of catching light, its unique shape, its individual character. I saw the category eye and I painted the memory of eyes. The mirror showed me that seeing is not passive. Seeing is an act. It requires you to overcome everything you think you know and encounter what is actually before you. This is what the school took from you most profoundly. They taught you to recognize categories, to memorize definitions, to identify the known. They never taught you to see what is actually there, especially when it contradicts what you expected to be there. Every examination you took trained you further into this blindness. The correct answer was already determined. Your task was to match it. You were never asked, what do you see that no one else has noticed? You were asked, can you remember what we told you to see? The artist learns to paint by training the eye to defeat the prejudice of the mind. But you were trained in reverse. Your mind was strengthened to override what your eye observed. When the test and the truth contradicted each other, you learned to trust the test. I must tell you something that caused me both shame and secret pride throughout my life. I was homo senza lettere, a man without letters. My Latin was poor, my Greek non-existent. I could not read the great classical texts that every educated person was expected to know. The scholars of my time looked down upon me for this. They quoted Plato and Aristotle with ease. They debated the fine points of ancient philosophy. They considered themselves the guardians of knowledge because they had read the right books and could cite the proper authorities. I confess, when I was young, this wounded me. I felt inferior. I tried to teach myself Latin, struggled with it, made little progress. I was invited to gatherings of learned men, and I remained quiet, feeling my ignorance like a weight upon my chest. But then something changed. I began to dissect human bodies, and I discovered that Galen, the great ancient authority on anatomy, whom every physician worshipped, was wrong. He had never actually dissected a human body. He had dissected apes and pigs and assumed the human form would be the same. For 1,000 years, physicians had been repeating Galen's errors because he was the authority, and they never checked. I checked, and I found the truth was different. In that moment, I understood my lack of education was not a disadvantage. It was a liberation. I had not filled my mind with authorities I would have to overcome. I came to nature directly, without the intermediary of other men's opinions. The scholars could quote what Aristotle said about motion. I dropped objects from towers and measured how they fell. The scholars could describe what the ancients believed about anatomy. I opened the body and drew what was actually there. Your schools created in you what mine failed to create in me, a deep trust and authority over observation, and received wisdom over direct investigation, and the approved answer over the true one. And because they did this with credentials and degrees and elaborate systems of validation, you never suspected it was a trap. Now you understand the pattern of the theft. Let me show you precisely how the mechanism operates. Let me speak plainly about something most will not tell you. The system that educated you was not accidentally destructive to creativity. It was purposefully designed to produce a specific kind of human being. In my time, the guilds controlled the teaching of crafts. The guild masters needed apprentices who would follow established methods, who would not experiment in ways that might damage expensive materials or produce unpredictable results. They needed competence, not innovation. Innovation was for the masters, after they had spent decades proving they could follow the rules perfectly. Your modern schools emerged from the same impulse. The factories of your age needed workers who could follow instructions precisely, arrive on time, work in synchronized fashion, not question the purpose of their task, and remain at their station. The schools were deliberately designed, to train children for this life. Watch what your schools reward: sitting still for long periods, following arbitrary rules without questioning their purpose, producing the same answer as everyone else, completing tasks quickly rather than deeply, accepting the authority's judgment of quality rather than trusting one's own assessment. These are the virtues of the factory worker, not the discoverer. And watch what your schools punish: moving when one needs to move, asking why too many times, arriving at an answer through a different method than the one taught, spending too long on a question that fascinates you, questioning the teacher's judgment, following your curiosity into territories not on the examination. Here is what you must understand. This was not a failure of the educational system. This was the system succeeding at its true purpose. The profound genius of this design is that they convinced you it was for your own benefit. Education, they called it, presenting it as a gift, as opportunity, as the path to prosperity. And it was all of these things, but only if you accepted the bargain. Trade your creative autonomy for economic security. Trade your questions for credentials. Trade the uncertain path of discovery for the guaranteed path of compliance. I am not saying your teachers were evil. Most were trying to help you within the constraints they inherited. I am saying the system itself had a purpose you were never told about: to produce predictable, manageable, useful citizens, not unpredictable, ungovernable, creative ones. The child who cannot sit still, who asks inconvenient questions, who sees solutions no one taught. This child is not defective. This child is functioning exactly as a creative human should function. But the system cannot afford too many of these children. So it diagnoses them, medicates them, disciplines them until they conform or leave. You learned your creativity was a problem to be solved, not a gift to be cultivated. This was the first theft. Now I will teach you the principle that allowed me to master so many disciplines without formal schooling in any of them. It is the simplest and most difficult thing. Trust what you see more than what you are told. When I say this, you think you understand, but you do not yet. The depth of your conditioning runs deeper than you imagine. Let me prove this to you. In your mind, picture a tree. Go ahead, picture it now. What do you see? You see a tree. You see the general idea of treeness. You see perhaps a brown trunk and a green crown of leaves. This is not seeing. This is recognizing a category. Now I want you to imagine you go outside and stand before an actual tree. Look at it. Really. Look. How many different colors are in what you call green? How does the light strike the upper leaves differently than the lower ones? How does the trunk change color where moisture darkens it? How do the branches divide? At what angles? With what rhythm? Where is the bark rough and where is it smooth? How does the wind move the leaves at the top differently than the middle? If you look for 60 seconds with true attention, you will see more than you saw in your mind's image. You will see that you have never actually looked at a tree before. You have only recognized the category tree and moved on. This is what school trained you to do. Recognize, categorize, move on. The examination never asks, what did you notice about trees? It asks, what is a tree? A question that requires only memory, not observation. Here is the principle. Nature cannot lie. Authority can lie. Memory can lie. Assumption can lie. Only direct observation, disciplined and careful, leads to truth. When the physicians told me that Galen had explained the human heart, I did not argue with them. I simply opened the chest cavity and looked. When the natural philosophers told me that heavier objects fall faster than light ones, I did not debate. I dropped them and observed. When the artist told me that aerial perspective was about making distant things blue, I looked at actual mountains across distances and saw that it was more complex than color alone. Every great discovery I made came from trusting my observation over received wisdom. Every time I relied on authority without verification, I entered error. But here is what the school never taught you. Observation is a skill, not just an action. Looking is something anyone can do. Seeing requires training. I spent hours watching water flow in streams, not because I had a specific question, simply watching, noting the patterns, the way it curved and folded and created vortices. I drew what I saw, trying to capture the movement in still images. Slowly, over years, I began to understand the principles of fluid dynamics. Not through mathematics, those came later, but through observation first. You must retrain yourself in this skill. You must learn to look without immediately labeling. You must learn to see what is actually there rather than what you expect to be there. You must learn to hold your attention on one thing long enough that it begins to reveal its secrets. This is not mysticism. This is practice. A musician trains their ear. A chef trains their palate. The creative person must train their power of observation until it exceeds their power of assumption. When you can look at something you have seen 1,000 times and suddenly notice something you never saw before, you are beginning to see. When you can observe without the voice in your head immediately telling you what you are looking at, you are beginning to see. When you can let something surprise you even though you thought you knew what it was, you are beginning to see. The scholars of my time divided knowledge into separate territories. The mathematicians did not speak to the painters. The physicians did not consult the engineers. The philosophers did not dirty their hands with experiment. Each discipline guarded its methods and scorned the others. I rejected this division entirely. To me, painting required geometry, anatomy, optics, and natural philosophy. To design a flying machine required understanding bird anatomy, air movement, material strength, and proportion. Everything connected to everything else. But your schools have made this division worse. You are told these are the art students, these are the science students, these are the humanities students. You choose your track young, and from that point forward, you are trained to think in one mode and distrust the others. The creative person thinks with analysis, the scientist works with intuition and imagination, the poet must understand structure, the mathematician must be able to envision what has never been. These are not different kinds of thinking. They are the same thinking applied to different problems. When I painted The Last Supper, I used everything. The geometry of perspective to create depth, knowledge of anatomy to make the figures convincing, understanding of human emotion to capture the moment, architectural knowledge to frame the composition, optical understanding to make the colors recede and advance properly. It was not art. It was the application of everything I knew. When I designed fortifications for Duke Ludovico, I used everything. Engineering principles, but also artistic understanding of form, psychological knowledge of how imposing structures affect the morale of attackers, mathematical calculation of angles and trajectories, but also intuition about where weak points might lie. The school taught you to separate these. In doing so, they cut you off from your full power. The scientists among you learned to distrust imagination. The artists among you learned to fear mathematics. The writers among you abandoned visual thinking. Each was crippled in the name of specialization. But specialization serves the economy. It makes you replaceable because you only do one thing. The person who can only paint watercolors of flowers can be replaced by another person who can paint watercolors of flowers. But the person who understands beauty, structure, light, emotion, and can apply all of these to whatever problem presents itself, this person is irreplaceable. Creativity does not live in art alone. It lives in the integration of multiple ways of seeing. When I tell you that you must become an observer, I do not mean only visual observation. I mean observe patterns in human behavior. Observe how materials respond to stress. Observe how words create rhythm and emotion. Observe how abstract concepts can be represented in geometric forms. Observe how music and mathematics share structure. Observe how every discipline has principles that apply to every other discipline. The school separated these to make you manageable. You must reunite them to make yourself whole. Here is your practice. Whatever you are working on, whether it is writing, building, problem solving, or creating, ask yourself, what would someone from an entirely different discipline see here that I am missing? If you are writing, ask what a painter would notice about visual rhythm. If you are painting, ask what a musician would hear in the composition. If you are designing something, ask what a poet would perceive about its emotional resonance. The specialist knows one path through the forest. The integrator sees the whole forest from above and can cut a new path to wherever they need to go. I must now speak of something difficult, something that will require you to unlearn what the modern world has taught you most thoroughly: the worship of speed. Your schools trained you on the clock, 45 minutes per subject, then move on. Homework must be completed by tomorrow. Tests must be finished in an hour. Fast answers are rewarded. Slow thinkers are punished with poor marks. Everything in the system taught you that speed equals intelligence and delay equals deficiency. This is a lie that serves the factory but murders the creative spirit. I spent 4 years painting the Last Supper, 4 years for one fresco. I would arrive at the monastery, stare at the wall for hours without touching my brush, then suddenly paint furiously for a short time, then stop and stare again. The monks complained to Duke Ludovico that I was wasting time. The Duke summoned me to explain myself. I told him, men of genius sometimes accomplish most when they work least, for their minds are occupied in the clarification of ideas and the subsequent shaping of concepts which are only later given form by their hands. The Duke understood, the monks did not. The monks measured productivity by visible action, brush moving across wall. They could not see the work that was happening in stillness. You have been turned into monks who measure by motion. You believe you are being productive only when you are actively doing something. Thinking that produces no immediate output feels like wasting time. Sitting with a problem until it reveals itself feels like procrastination. Allowing an idea to develop slowly over months or years feels impossible when you have been trained to move from unit to unit, never dwelling, always advancing. But here's what I learned. The time spent in observation is not separate from the time spent in creation. It is the foundation of it. The painter who studies shadows for a year will paint them truly in a day. The painter who skips the study will paint them badly no matter how much time they spend. The school taught you that learning happens when you are being taught. But I learned that understanding happens in the silence between the lessons, in the time spent turning a problem over in your mind, while walking, while lying awake at night, while drawing the same form 60 different ways until the principle reveals itself. You were taught to fear boredom, to fill every moment with activity or stimulation. But boredom is the entry point to deep focus. When the mind exhausts the shallow entertainments, it begins to engage with the depth. When you can sit with a single problem for an hour, without distraction, without checking for messages, without needing to move to something else, then you are ready for real work. I do not romanticize this. It is not pleasant. It is often frustrating. There were days I wanted to abandon the horse, abandon the Last Supper, abandon my anatomical studies because progress was so slow. But I learned that the rhythm of creation is different from the rhythm of the factory. The factory rhythm is constant output, measured productivity, minimize wasted time, maximize efficiency. This produces widgets. The creative rhythm is long periods of apparent inaction punctuated by intense productivity, patient observation until understanding emerges, time that looks wasted but is actually essential, inefficiency that produces what efficiency never could. You must choose which rhythm you will serve. You cannot serve both. The world will pressure you constantly toward factory rhythm because that's what it knows how to measure and reward. But if you submit to that pressure, your work will have the character of all rushed things, functional but not transcendent, complete but not true. Now I must teach you about something your schools destroyed more completely than almost anything else. Your ability to learn from error without shame. Look at any of my notebooks, the ones that survive, and you will see mistakes on every page. Calculations I attempted and then crossed out. Drawings I began and abandoned. Ideas I explored and then rejected. Hypotheses I tested and found wanting. If I had been graded on these notebooks, I would have failed. There is no clean linear progression from question to answer. There is exploration, dead ends, backtracking, confusion, and gradual clarification. But this mess, this glorious mess, is what learning actually looks like. It does not look like the clean textbook where every chapter leads logically to the next and every problem has a solution in the back of the book. It looks like trying, failing, trying differently, failing again, adjusting, testing, discovering what does not work, and slowly eliminating impossibilities until what remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Your schools could not tolerate this. The tests must be graded objectively. The homework must be correct or incorrect. Your performance must be reduced to a number so it can be compared to other numbers. In this system, error cannot be part of method. It must be evidence of deficiency. So you learn to hide your mistakes. You learn to erase rather than examine. You learn that the goal was to appear to have understood on the first attempt. You learned that asking for help was admitting weakness. You learned that not knowing was shameful. This created in you a terror of being wrong that now paralyzes your creative work. You cannot begin because you might make a mistake. You cannot share your work because someone might see its flaws. You cannot experiment because experiment means risk, and risk means possible failure, and failure means what? What does it mean? In the laboratory of my mind, failure meant nothing except information. I learned as much from the machines that did not work as from the ones that did, perhaps more. The failures showed me which principles I had misunderstood, which assumptions were false, which approaches were dead ends. When I tried to design a flying machine based on the wing flapping of birds, it failed. But that failure taught me that human muscle could not generate enough force for that method. So I began to study gliding birds instead, hawks and eagles that could soar without constant flapping. This led me toward understanding of air currents and wing shape that the flapping approach never would have revealed. The error was not wasted time. The error was the path to the better question. But you cannot learn this way if every error damages your grade, your standing, your future prospects. The school system made error costly, and in doing so, made learning safe but shallow. You learned only what you were certain you could learn successfully. You attempted only what you were confident you could complete correctly. This is not learning. This is performing learning for an audience of evaluators. Here is what you must recover: the privacy of your own practice, where no one grades you, where you can fail 60 times before you succeed once, where the mess of exploration is allowed to be messy. In my studio, I had apprentices. I did not grade them. I showed them what I was working on, demonstrated techniques, set them problems to solve, examined their work, and pointed out what needed correction. Sometimes I let them make errors I knew they were about to make, because the error itself would teach them more than my warning. Your model for learning should not be the school examination. Your model should be the apprenticeship, where the master knows you will make every mistake they once made, and they let you make them, and then they show you what the mistake reveals. When you sit down to create something and you find it is terrible, this is not evidence you lack talent. This is evidence you have taste that exceeds your current skill. The gap between the two is where growth happens. The gap is not a problem to be ashamed of. The gap is the precise location of your next lesson. Finally, I must speak of the deepest theft, the one you may not have noticed because it happened so gradually. The school stole from you the capacity for wonder. Do you remember what it was like to be a child encountering the world for the first time? Everything was worthy of investigation. A puddle could absorb your attention for an hour. A butterfly was a miracle. A shadow on the wall invited speculation about light and substance and mystery. You asked why endlessly. Why is the sky blue? Why do birds fly? Why do we have to sleep? Why does ice melt? Why, 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 why? Until the adults grew exhausted and stopped answering, or worse, gave you answers that shut down your curiosity rather than deepening it. Then you entered school. And slowly, question by question, your wonder was replaced with something else. Not knowledge. Knowledge can coexist with wonder. It was replaced with the feeling that everything had already been explained, that the interesting questions had already been answered by people smarter than you, that your job was to learn what they discovered, not to discover for yourself. You learned that there was a body of established knowledge, and your relationship to it was to consume it, to demonstrate you had consumed it, and then to apply it in the approved ways. You learned that the frontier of human understanding was somewhere far away, worked on by credentialed experts, and you would never reach it. This is the final cage they built around you. The cage that convinced you that your curiosity was naive, that your questions had obvious answers, that wonder was childish and maturity meant accepting what you were told. But I am telling you that this is a lie. And it is the lie that keeps you from your creative power more than any other. I spent 30 years dissecting bodies. 30 years. Do you think that after the first few bodies, I knew everything there was to know about human anatomy? I could have stopped at 10 bodies and taught competently, but I did not stop because I was still finding things that amazed me, still seeing patterns I had not noticed before, still asking questions I had not thought to ask. Every time I understood one thing, it opened 5 new questions. The more I learned about the heart, the more curious I became about the blood vessels. The more I understood about the blood vessels, the more I wondered about the liver and the lungs and how everything connected. Understanding did not exhaust curiosity. It fed it. This is what the school system cannot tolerate. The student who learns the curriculum and then asks, "But what about?" The system must move on. The schedule is fixed. There is more content to cover. Your continuing curiosity is a disruption, so you learn to stop asking. You learn to accept the explanation you were given and move to the next unit. You learned that deep curiosity about one thing was less valuable than shallow familiarity with many things. You learned to kill your own wonder in the service of completing the program. To recover your creative power, you must recover your capacity for wonder, not artificial enthusiasm, not forced positivity, but genuine curiosity that cannot be satisfied with the first explanation. Stand before something you see every day, the way light comes through your window, the way water moves when you pour it, the way your own hand moves when you reach for something. Look at it as if you have never seen it before. Ask yourself, how does this actually work? Not what did I learn about this in school, but what do I see that I do not fully understand? Let yourself not know. Let yourself be confused. Let yourself ask questions that might have obvious answers, because often the obvious answer is incomplete or wrong. I wrote in my notebooks, the greatest deception men suffer is from their own opinions. The mind seeks certainty. It seeks to categorize and file and move on. But the creative mind must resist this. It must remain uncertain longer than is comfortable. It must hold the question open until a true answer emerges, not accept the convenient answer just to achieve closure. Your school trained you to seek closure, to fill in the answer box, to achieve completion. I am training you to live in the question, to let it trouble you, to let it pull you deeper. When you feel wonder at something, do not dismiss it as childish. That feeling is your creativity calling you back to itself. That feeling is your mind saying, here is something worth understanding. That feeling is the doorway to real work. The world will tell you to be practical, to focus on what produces results, to stop wasting time on things that merely interest you. But I am telling you that the things that interest you are the map to your genius. Follow that interest. Chase it down whatever strange paths it leads. Let yourself become obsessed with small things, with questions that seem to have no practical value. This is not wasted time. This is the time when you are most alive, most yourself, most capable of producing work that no one else could produce. The school taught you that creativity was a subject to be learned. I am teaching you that creativity is the natural state of the curious mind, allowed to wonder. Now you understand what was taken and why it was taken. The question remains, how do you reclaim it? Not through rebellion against the system. The system will continue whether you fight it or not through rejecting all that you learned. Some of what you learned is valuable, but through deliberate practice that rebuilds what was dismantled. I will give you specific exercises. These are not optional if you wish to recover your creative power. These are not suggestions. These are the methods I used every day for 67 years. And they work because they align with how the human mind actually learns, not how the system pretends it learns. Every morning, before you begin your work, spend 20 minutes observing one thing, not studying it to learn facts about it, not reading about it, observing it directly with your senses. Choose something small, a plant on your table, the way morning light falls across your room, your own hand, a cup of water, anything. Spend 20 minutes looking at only this thing, not glancing at it, looking at it with sustained attention. Do not try to draw conclusions. Do not try to have insights. Simply look. Notice colors, shapes, textures, the way light moves across it, shadows, details you never noticed before. When your mind wanders, and it will constantly, because you have been trained to have the attention span of a goldfish, simply bring it back. Not with judgment, just return your attention to the object. After 20 minutes, write down what you observed, not what you thought about it, what you saw. Be specific. The shadow on the left side was darker than the shadow on the right side. The color changed from green to yellow-green where the light struck it directly. The edge was not sharp but slightly blurred. Details. This practice does three things. It retrains your attention span. It shows you how much you normally do not see. It begins to rewire your brain to observe rather than merely recognize. Do this every day for 30 days. The same time, the same duration. Do not skip days. Do not tell yourself you are too busy. 20 minutes. You waste more time than this scrolling on your device. This is not optional if you want what I am teaching you. This is the foundation. Once per week, attempt something you do not know how to do. Not something hard that you might fail at. Something you definitely cannot do. The goal is to fail, to experience the failure, and to examine it without shame. If you are a writer, try to paint something. If you are a painter, try to write code. If you work with numbers, try to compose music. Whatever you have no training in, no confidence in, try it. Spend 1 hour in the attempt. When you fail, and you will fail, do not stop in frustration. Examine the failure. Ask yourself, what did I expect would happen? What actually happened? What does this tell me about my assumptions? If I tried again, what would I adjust? What did this failure teach me that success would not have taught? Write down your answers. Keep these failure reports in a journal. The purpose of this exercise is to desensitize you to the fear of being bad at something. You have been trained to only attempt things you can succeed at. This training is a prison. You must break it by deliberately choosing failure and discovering that it does not destroy you. After 30 days of this practice, you will notice something. You begin to find the failures interesting rather than shameful. You begin to see them as data rather than judgments. This is when your creative power begins to return. Choose one problem or project you are working on. Every evening, spend 15 minutes writing about this problem from the perspective of a different discipline. Monday, approach it as a painter would. What are the colors, shapes, visual relationships? Tuesday, approach it as a musician would. What is the rhythm, the harmony, the discord? Wednesday, approach it as an engineer. What is the structure, the load-bearing elements, the weak points? Thursday, approach it as a poet. What is the metaphor, the emotional resonance? Friday, approach it as a mathematician. What are the patterns, the ratios, the underlying equations? You do not need to be expert in these disciplines. You are practicing looking at the same problem from multiple angles. You are training your mind to escape the single track the school placed you on. After 1 month of this practice, look back at what you have written. You will see connections you did not see before. You will see solutions that were invisible when you only approached the problem one way. This is integration. The unification of multiple ways of seeing into a single, more powerful vision. Choose one project that you commit to work on for 3 months, minimum. Not 3 months of daily work, 3 months of allowing it to occupy your attention even when you are not actively working on it. The rules are these. You may not rush it to completion. You may not set a deadline. You may spend days simply thinking about it without producing anything. You may go down paths that turn out to be wrong. You may start over multiple times. The project should be something that matters to you, not something required by external pressure. Something you care about understanding or creating well. Every week, make some observation about the project. Not progress, observation. I noticed this week that the structure is more complex than I first thought. I realized my initial approach was based on a false assumption. I discovered a new aspect I had not considered. At the end of 3 months, you will have something that has the character of slow work, depth that rushed work can never achieve. You will also have retrained yourself in the rhythm of real creative work as opposed to the artificial rhythm of school assignments. This is the practice that most directly contradicts everything school taught you. Do it anyway. We are nearing the end of our time together, but you are only beginning the real work. Let me gather for you what I have shown you. Your schools were not designed to awaken your creativity. They were designed to make you useful to systems that needed predictable, manageable workers. This was not accident. This was purpose, and it succeeded. But what was taken from you was never truly lost. It was only buried, covered over with layers of compliance and fear and false belief. You believed you lacked creativity. You believed some people were gifted and others were not. You believed that the blank canvas or empty page meant you had nothing to say. All of this is false. What you lack is not creativity. It is practice in the methods of creative work. You lack attention span because you have been trained to move quickly. You lack confidence in your observations because you have been trained to trust authority. You lack the courage to experiment because you have been trained to fear error. But all of these can be rebuilt, not through thinking about them, not through understanding them intellectually, but through practice. I have given you 4 practices. They seem simple. Do not mistake simplicity for ease. These practices are difficult because they require you to unlearn what you have spent years learning. They require you to sit still when you want to move on. They require you to fail when you want to succeed. They require you to see what is actually there instead of what you expect to see. If you do these practices, truly do them, not just read about them and nod, you will discover something extraordinary. 6 months from now, you will look at your work and not recognize it. You will see it has a quality of presence, of authenticity, of aliveness that your previous work lacked. People will ask you what changed. You will tell them, I learned to see again, and here is my final gift to you. The thing I learned in my 67 years that I wish someone had told me when I was young. Your creativity is not something you must find. It is something you must stop running from. It has been calling to you in every moment of boredom, every flash of curiosity, every time you wondered what if. But you have been trained to ignore these calls, to move past them, to focus on what is practical and measurable and safe. Stop running. Turn around. Listen to what your curiosity is telling you. Follow it, even when it seems to lead nowhere. Trust your observations, even when they contradict what you were taught. Give yourself permission to fail spectacularly and often. Work slowly on what matters to you. Let go of the need to be efficient, productive, impressive. Do the work that only you can do, the work that emerges from your particular way of seeing, your specific obsessions, your unique combination of knowledge and ignorance. The world has enough people doing what they were taught to do. The world needs you doing what you cannot help but do once you stop suppressing it. I cannot give you creativity. I can only show you where you left it and how to return to it. The rest is your work. Joyful work, difficult work, real work. Go now. Observe something until you truly see it. Fail at something until you learn from it. Work slowly on something until it reveals its depths to you. This is how you become free. And when you have reclaimed your creative power, when your work carries the unmistakable mark of someone who sees the world freshly and records it faithfully, remember, this was always yours. You did not gain something new. You recovered something ancient, the ability to look at the world with clear eyes and wonder what it means. If this teaching has resonated with you, if you see yourself in the theft I have described and you wish to reclaim what was taken, then I ask you this. Subscribe to this channel for more teachings on observation, creation, and the integration of art and science. Press the like if this sparked something in you that you thought was dead. And in the comments below, tell me, what did your schooling take from you? What was the moment you learned to doubt yourself? Let us build here a community of those who are learning to see again. Until we meet in the next lesson, keep your eyes open, your hands moving, and your curiosity alive. The world is waiting to be seen anew.